In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to go about finding chords that will accompany your melodies. So let's say that you've created a really awesome and wicked guitar riff, but you don't know which chords are going to work behind it. Or maybe you do, but you don't actually know what other options you have to make it a little bit more interesting or even less predictable. Now I've created a real simple 4-bar melody for the purpose of this video, which sounds like this. And now what we're going to do is try and figure out what options we have available as far as chords when trying to accompany this riff. So the first thing that we need to acknowledge is the key that we're in. Now for this particular riff, I played a total of 12 notes, which makes it super easy for us because we've fulfilled the notes of a whole key. And since this has an overall minor tonality, we are in the key of A minor or C. Now the next thing that we need to figure out are the available chords in the key of A minor. And to do this, what we're going to need to do is to take each note of the key and then stack thirds on top of that note until we form a chord. So the most basic chord type would be your triads, of course. So we would stack 3 notes on top of each other. But you can also stack a 4th note to create 7th chords, or even extended chords will work for this approach. But for the sake of ease, we're just going to stick with triads right now. So if we go ahead and figure this out, starting off with your root note, which is of course A, we can go root, 2nd, flat 3rd, so that there is the distance of a 3rd within the key that we're in, and then we can go flat 3, 4, 5, and this note here is a 3rd above the flat 3, and that gives us our first triad, 1, flat 3, 5. If we stack those notes on top of each other, we form a minor chord. If we do the same with our 2nd degree now, which is our B note, we have B, C, D, so B and D, that's a 3rd apart. And then D, E, F, that's another 3rd. And more specifically, we have our root, flat 3, flat 5, which forms a diminished chord. And then if we continue to do this with the rest of the notes throughout the scale, we'll have the following chords. So we start off with 1 minor, 2 diminished, 3 major, 4 minor, 5 minor, 6 major, 7 major, and then of course back to your root. Now believe it or not, we've done all of the hard work already. We've determined the key and we've found out all of the available chords within this key. Now with that knowledge at hand, we now just have to make the right decisions and choose the right chords behind this melody that I previously played. Now I'm going to go ahead and make this a bit more visually appealing rather than me just waving my hand around and telling you what to do here. So you'll see on screen both tab and notation, which is going to help us out with this next exercise. I'll also keep this chart on screen, which is going to be incredibly helpful when figuring out what parts of the melody fit best with the chords that we have available. Now to keep this super simple, we're going to start off by allocating 1 chord per bar. Now within the very first bar, we start off with an A note, which naturally, since it's the very first note that we hear on that bar, is going to be the strongest note within that bar. And with that in mind, what we'll be able to do is to choose chords that have an A note in them. So if we look at our chart here, we have the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 6 chord. Each of these chords contain the A note. So these are going to be good chords to choose for this bar. Now more than often we can build a kind of hierarchy of the chords available for this particular bar, showing which of the chords are going to work best. And we can do that by looking ahead beyond the first note that's played and figure out how many of these notes fit within each of the available chords that we can play for this bar. We have the notes A, C, and E, which are all chord tones of the 1 chord. The 4 chord and the 6 chord only contain 2 notes from the melody, which make them less strong than the 1 chord. However, with this said, that doesn't mean that they don't work. They certainly do work. It's just that they won't be as strong as the 1 chord. Now this idea might work in your advantage because maybe you don't want to choose a strong chord, because more than often, strong chords are predictable chords. Even by non-musicians, it's very easy to listen to a melody and to be able to predict what chord is coming next. But this is where you're the boss and you can choose whatever chord you want and therefore take the listener on whatever journey you want. So we've figured out what chords work for the first bar. Let's move on to the second bar now, or if you think about it, This is the first bar, the previous melody is just a lead on. So let's go ahead and actually name this one the first bar. Now once again, we're going to take the same approach that we previously did. The first note and the strongest note of that bar is the F. And if we look at our chord chart, you'll be able to see our 2 chord, our 4 chord, and our 6 chord all contain the note F, therefore giving us another 3 options to choose from. Once again, if we want to create a hierarchy, we can look ahead. So we have the notes F, D, and A. And you'll notice of the 2, the 4, and the 6 chord, only the 4 chord contain all of these notes, which make the 4 chord the strongest choice of the 3. The 2 chord and the 6 chord only contain 2 notes from the melody, which therefore put them below that 4 chord on the hierarchy. Moving on to the second bar, we hammer on from the D into the E, E being the first note of the bar. And again, if we go ahead and look at the chord chart, you'll see that the 1 chord, the 3 chord, and the 5 chord each contain the E note. Now the strongest of the 3 could either be the 3 chord or the 5 chord in this instance, since both of these chords contain all of the notes from the melody in this bar. And then the 1 chord wouldn't be as strong of a decision because of the absence of the A note. Now into the third bar, we lead this bar with a G note, which gives us the option to choose between the 3 chord, the 5 chord, and the 7 chord. And then once again, the strongest decisions would be the 3 chord or the 5 chord, followed by the 7 chord. And then for the very last bar, now considering that the majority of the bar occupies an A note, that would strongly indicate that the 1 chord is probably the best decision here. However, we could also go ahead and use our 4 chord or our 6 chord, since they also contain that A note. Now with this in mind, what we've essentially done is taken the first note of each bar to determine the chord that will sound best in the harmony. And we can actually go ahead and do this for every single note throughout the entire melody, but if we were to do that, it would just turn into an absolute mess, because there would be absolutely no distinction between the harmony and the melody, and it would be too fast for us to even remember what's going on. However, a good place to start is to perhaps introduce a second chord on some of the bars where you think it's necessary. Now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this now, reflecting the knowledge that I've just shared with you. I'm going to start off by playing a chord progression which is completely 100% strong and predictable with just 1 chord per bar, and then I'll gradually make it a little bit less predictable and introduce more chords as I go through this. Now, although technically this works because both the F and the D note are included in the 2 chord, because it's a diminished chord naturally, it has a very uneasy sound to it. So it's probably best that you avoid the diminished chord unless you know how to use it properly. So a better decision perhaps would be to substitute that 2 chord for example, the 4 chord. So there you have it. There's a bunch of examples there for you to reflect on and try yourself and think about. I hope you managed to take away a bunch of useful information. If you're interested in taking your music theory knowledge to the next level, then please consider checking out the link to my website, which is linked in the description below, where you'll find heaps more instructional content covering all of the essential knowledge that you need relevant to this topic and relevant to excelling this topic into more practical and useful things. That's everything from me today. I will see you in the next video.